I'm Nicole, and you're listening to Mommyhood Unscripted, real talk about moms for moms. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Mommyhood Unscripted. Are you ready to have your mind blown today? If you work outside of the home, and if you have a child or you're going to have a child, this is a must listen, all right? And if you are an employer and you have employees who have children or are going to have children, please, I beg of you to listen to this. This is such an eye-opening conversation that's based specifically on data and research that Maureen Perry-Jenkins has compiled for over 2 decades. And it's a conversation that definitely deserves a spotlight. And it's like we're just starting to tap into it. So that's why we had her on the show. And I cannot wait for you to listen to what she has to say. Maureen Perry-Jenkins is an author and a researcher who specializes in clinical psychology and developmental science. She's also the department chair of the Department of Psychological and Brain Sciences at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, and she's a professor there as well, so she has a lot to teach us. Maureen is all about taking a closer look at the ways in which sociocultural factors, so we're talking about things like race, ethnicity, gender, and social class, actually shape the mental health and family relationships of parents and their kids. Her current research examines the work and family experiences of blue-collar families. She also has a book out called Work Matters: How Parents' Jobs Shape Children's Well-Being. That was just published in August of 2022. And Maureen's most recent study, called the Work and Family Transitions Project, explores the effects of the transition to parenthood and then the early return to paid employment on working-class parents' psychological well-being and their personal relationships. So without further ado, a big welcome to Maureen Perry-Jenkins on Mommyhood Unscripted. Thanks for joining us, Maureen.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
So you must have been excited when the Washington Post is picking up your research, and this was the it story over the past few weeks, that started really coming in. I was even hearing conversation in the newsroom amongst my mother friends. It's your research. It's work that you've been working hard for, over 2 decades now on this?
Exactly. Yes.
Wow.
This is a topic, as you said in the beginning, that's near and dear to everyone's heart. I mean, work and family are the 2 most important spheres in our lives. And the way they intersect and the way they shape our lives in both directions, I think, is just critically important. And the ultimate impact on our kids, which every working parent I've ever interviewed, that's the thing they're most concerned about. Those are the kinds of questions we wanted to answer.
And hopefully this kind of research can help, guide new parents, right? So we can kind of stop this generational pattern of we're going to work and whatever we do outside the home is definitely going to impact our kids directly.
Right. In the other frame of this, it's interesting. Most of the interviews and most of the sort of invites I've gotten have been around parenting, and parenting groups and parenting. And in fact, a big message here is this should not be all on parents. We as parents, invest a lot in our kids, but so should we as a society. Mm-hmm. And so should we as we think about the kind of work we create for people and the kind of policies we create for people. And we sort of, in our very individualistic way, often say, you have the kids, you take care of the kids. But in fact, in the countries that do a much better job at this than we do, we see kids doing much, much better. And I don't think that's just some other aberration. I think it's directly related to this natural experiment we've had going on for the past 50 years of both parents working and not having the supports, both policy supports, but also what happens day to day on your job.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we're dedicating all this time trying to make a living and support our families financially, and yet we're not being supported in any way to sustain that in, a manner which will benefit our kids overall. And a manner, it's almost like we're set up to fail from right out of the gate, right? You become, in a woman's situation, you become pregnant. Mm-hmm. You, in some situations, you have a really hard time with the pregnancy, you're nauseous, whatever. Then you have your child. Then in a lot of situations, you're not even paid when you have that leave as you explore.
Right.
And then you're thrown back into the throes of work now as a changed individual, mentally, physically.
Yes.
And then in some cases, you're expected to, still kind of like try and help feed your child while you're working full time outside of the house.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
it's insane when you really
Right.
think about it and spell it out.
It is insane. And I think, understandably, a lot of researchers, myself included, have focused on immediate things like paid leave and sick time and nursing benefits and just policies and rules that make it possible for parents to just literally be there and do the job. What we tried to explore, and there's a lot of that in the book, but I think the most sort of interesting newer part of the research we're doing is really saying what happens at work isn't just something that happens and you can go home and take off your jacket or whatever and it goes away. That what the experiences at work, both good and bad, you spend hours and hours at the job, and those hours shape you as a person in terms of your development, in terms of your mental health. And it's not like that gets turned off when you get home. And there's this really interesting expression, sort of the long arm of the job. And when I think about that, it's that long arm that it's not just this job over here. It's this job that comes in and affects how you interact with your baby when you get home, how you interact with your partner, what you eat, all sorts of things that shape who you become as a parent. And I also, some of the feedback I've been getting, it's like in the Washington Post article was, oh, great, another book to make parents feel guilty. That was actually the last. I'm a working parent. That was the last goal of this book. The goal of this book was to really understand when and under what conditions can work actually be a good thing,
right?
And relate to positive developmental outcomes for parents and kids, and under what conditions is it not? And to really be able to tease that, because we're not going to stop working. Mm-hmm. We're going to keep working, but let's know what about work makes a difference and what workers and employers could do to make workplaces a more joyous place to be perfectly honest.
Right. Yeah. It's not necessarily in the parents' court. It can't be.
We started interviewing parents when they were pregnant because as a developmentalist, and we know sort of that early year of infancy in terms of brain development and just, development explodes in that first year. Not that it doesn't in the later years, but that first year is really a critical year. And we had these policies in place that are, at the time I was actually doing this study, unpaid leave, everywhere. And parents who can't afford that, going back to work maybe 2 weeks after having a child, 3 weeks after having a child, your body hasn't even recovered from the birth. You're trying to find childcare for a 3-week-old infant. You're trying to establish nursing, which actually doesn't usually hold. Mm-hmm. So we've created sort of this perfect storm of lack of support at a time when it's most critical for families. And so I was really interested in understanding kind of what that process was like for parents. And then with the assumption that, but some people actually do okay. Some people manage quite well. How? Why? What's happening in those situations? So then we can come back and say, it's not like we can tell folks don't work, or it's not like we can tell folks take off 6 months because most, but what we can do is say, all of us as a society, not just parents, but employers, can think about the environments we're creating for human development.
Mm-hmm. Is this kind of research being taken up too with legislators?
Well, not much. I mean, because part of what I'm seeing and arguing in our work is that the policy level things around leave and sick time, I think should be at sort of a government level, right? A lot of the things I'm talking about, which are workplace conditions, vary so much by workplace. So we have people in meat packing plants. We have people who are nursing aides. We have, so what needs to happen in any given workplace is different. And the point I make in the book is that, employers will say to me, so what can we do? What are the things that would matter? And how much is it going to cost us? And good questions. And basically, I say, ask your employees. Mm-hmm. You will get an answer like that. Like, what would make your life easier as a working parent? What could we do here? And to make it a place you want to be, to give you some control, to give you some autonomy, to give you some flexibility. Right. Employers have mixed reactions to that. Some are very nervous, and I think expect it's going to incite kind of group, I don't know, union behavior, something like that. When in fact, when employees are listened to, in the book, there's lots of examples of very little things that make a huge difference for the parent. And some of these things are literally like for one of our pregnant moms, it was, there was a rule. She worked at a checkout that you couldn't sit. You had to stand when you're doing checkout. And she was, 9 months pregnant. And her boss said, oh, here's a stool. You can sit. It's fine. And she was like, he broke the rule for me. Like that was a rule. I knew that was a rule, but to me, that felt like teeny weeny, but for her, it showed he realized she was pregnant. He let her have a seat. And then there were other things that happened, small things. And, some of my critics will say those small things are Band-Aids. You're not dealing with the bigger issue. And they're right. In some ways, there's huge issues but our data say even a few of those small things change people's views of their work, of themselves, affects their parenting, and in fact, ends up helping the employer. They don't quit. They stay longer, so it actually ends up being a win-win, even though I don't spend a lot of time worrying about the ROI for the employer, but it ends up coming out that way.
I mean, we have to start somewhere.
And some of the things I say, like, you could start tomorrow. Literally, there's things you could just start tomorrow at work that would help parents. And the first just being, how's it going here? What's hard about this job? Is there anything that you could continue to do your work, but actually feel better about your work? What an easy question to ask. And every employee has an answer. They know what would help.
Do you think employers actually get nervous, though, just because of liability and other things to ask that question? Because I feel as though we're just the times we're living in, it's very precarious. People are not confident that they're going to come across as caring, or they want to watch how they word things.
Yes, I absolutely think so. But some of the interesting conversations I've had with employers. So in the book, I give lots of examples where employees are companies where you get a number of points, and after you hit a certain number of points, you get fired. And these are negative points. So if you come in late, or you leave early, or you take a sick day, or all of these different, there's a whole checklist of things. And if you use them, you get blacklisted. And by the time, after you get 7, you can be laid off. And they're telling me these stories. And so I say to the employers, okay, so where's the positive list? Where's the list if you come in early, or you actually stay for the overtime, or you do that? Where's that list that reinforces folks for the amazing things they do at your job, not just the bad things they do at your job? And they kind of look at me like, oh, yeah, we don't have one of those, so that's a really important first step, right? Even just verbally thanking people for the work they do. The data shows matters for climate, matters for respect. These are really simple things.
We focus on the negative too much as a society. Absolutely.
Yeah, there's a level of distrust, I think, often between employers and employees and that's where it needs to start, I think. Yeah. I think what we're finding is that conditions of the job, like autonomy, like having some say in what you do and feeling like you're part of the system, having relationships at work, having a supportive supervisor at work, are all related to better mental health post-birth. And those factors then go on to predict parenting and child outcomes. So it's not that all parents are miserable. And many are like, the joy of having a baby, having enough time off, feeling like they're fulfilled, feeling like they've got good childcare, that it comes together. It's hard, absolutely. But there's a sense of purpose that comes for many that's related to all sorts of good things. And we tend to just tell this sad narrative. And what we want to know is, when's the narrative a good narrative, and what are the factors that are predicting that narrative?
So I remember reading, in your research in the articles that, something like creativity and things that spark joy on the job, that will translate in a positive way when you get home with your kids.
Exactly. So one of the examples I gave in the book, and I think in actually one of the articles, was I actually looked at, I just picked the person in my study who had the highest level of autonomy at work, like who has the highest score and we have a measure of autonomy. And it was this woman who worked at a candle packing factory. And I was like, what? Why would she have the highest level of autonomy? So went back and started looking at her data. And we have, we interviewed multiple times. So we have whole stories we can tell about our families. And she basically worked at this. She told this story because I went back and asked her, like, well, what is this about? And she said, well, when I was at work, when I first started there and I packed all these candle boxes, literally she packed boxes of orders. She would start putting little notes in the boxes saying, I noticed you like the vanilla smells. Try this new one. And she started giving them little nicknames like the Vanilla Vixen or whatever. And she would like write to them and put a little note in and put a little. And so she just did this totally under her own free will. And her boss started getting requests for Linda to fill the boxes. And he was like, what is going on? So he went to her and was like, why are people that, how would they even know who's filling a box? Why are they asking for you to fill their box? And now that this could go either way, right? Like, and she was telling me the story. And so she said, well, this is what I do. And she told him and she showed him examples. And he's like, this is brilliant. Can you share this with the other people in the shop? And can we talk about how we actually, attach sort of names and faces to these faceless clients is what they're calling them. And so she ended up doing these little workshops. She ended up getting a promotion, and it ended up this job. She loved her job. She felt like she'd been respected. She'd done something that was valued. And that didn't cost a cent.
Right.
It didn't cost a cent. And then she will never leave that place. She loves that. She loves her boss. And so those to me are examples of, we wouldn't necessarily think of a job like that being something that you could be connected to. And she also had great relationships with her coworkers. So any job has the potential, I think, to be a place where you want to go. You might not particularly like the actual job that you're doing, but there's something about the relationships and the goals and the purpose that make it meaningful, or the team approach, or whatever it is. I had another guy who worked as in a restaurant as a sous chef, and crazy, right? When it gets going, you're busy, and could be incredibly stressful. He loved it. He loved the team, and he loved sort of being part of this group that got things done. And they were like, all got along, and it was really, high intense, but fun. And afterwards they would sort of hang out and sort of process the night. Loved his job. Right. Wow. And that kind of think about someone like that coming home versus someone coming home who's basically been told, you need to stand for the next 8 hours and check out things. You're not allowed to take your break this time. You're not allowed to talk to coworkers. You're only supposed to talk to customers. That kind of feel versus another. And a day, all of us on any given day have bad days. We come home and we don't interact with our kids the way we would want to. We're short with them, or we pull back, or whatever. Those happen. It's when they happen day after day after day after day, week after week, month after month. That's when we start worrying as psychologists about both parents' mental health and well-being and their kids.
Right. Yeah. I know when you say, month after month, year after year, even, you think back of the 1950s, even the 60s, when the dad would typically come home from work and the dinner would be on the table. And then after dinner, children should be seen, not heard. And he's going to watch his show in the recliner, right? Like, that was not good translating to the next generation.
Right. And, I think how much of that story was really real or not. I mean, I think this sort of question about our image of what times were like and what times are actually like is right. But I also, I think we've not, parents don't understand. I do have many parents who say, I leave work at work, I go home, and work doesn't. And we may all say that to a certain degree. It's not, but the data's not true. I mean, the data does not bear that out, right? The data would say we're actually not really good at monitoring. And what we see more often than harsh parenting or negative parenting, and we do see some of that, is more disengaged parenting. So you come home and you're fried and you're tired, and you turn on the TV and you give the child something to play with, or if they're older, you give them their iPad or whatever. And it's all the kinds of things where no parent feels great about that, but they're also just don't have the resources to rise to what they need to be doing. And at any given day, you say, oh, it's just today, but it's whether those patterns sort of start developing. And the other important thing about studying families when we do, as they're becoming a family, as they're having their child, is that those patterns that get set up in the first year are patterns that tend to stick, right? So any habits you start setting up, any patterns you set up in terms of interacting with your child are the ones that stay. It's remarkable. There's actually data on marriages as well. Like, whoever makes the coffee during the first month of marriage is the person that always makes, like, weird things like that. But you get into, and it's understandable. We get into patterns. So if you think about that first year as a time where we could actually say the pattern could be, when you come home, you have 20 minutes, or you figure out a way, or you don't even come right home. You take the 20 minutes you need to pull yourself together, to take a break, whatever. And then when you come home, you are ready to engage. That's probably a better solution than to come home and turning on the TV and not engaging at all, for example. And it's having parents sort of be aware of their patterns. And most parents know. And most, myself included, will think of times they're just really bad at it, right? I didn't do this. I should have done that. And also trying to change that script. Like, when did it go well?
Right.
When did I feel really good about how I was when I came home? And what was different about work and about parenting? And how do I create those patterns? Um, it's that positive, it's the positives opposed to sort of just beating yourself up about the negatives.
That might fuel us to be better
Yes.
than we are in that moment,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. I mean, if you think about it, and if you can think about a time where something great has happened at work, or you've been rewarded, or you've been, even think about following that through to what happens when you walk in the door at home. Like, what's the energy? What's the feeling? And not that that's going to be that high every day, but if there's a feeling at work that you're getting fulfilled in some way, not always drained, but good things can happen and fill you up, that's what spills over at home. That's important.
Is there a way where, you are feeling that and you come home and you're so excited to tell your spouse about your day and it actually can translate to a negative impact on the child because you're not engaging as much or they can't understand what you're talking about?
Well, yeah, never underestimate what children can understand about their parents' relationships, even nonverbal children. And I think what we're talking about is positive interaction. So if children are seeing their parents talk to each other, hug each other, laugh a little bit, communicate a little bit, they might feel like I want some attention, but they're seeing another whole set of modeling that needs to happen as well, right? Critically important.
Yeah.
And, for a lot of our families who do shift work, one parent does 7 to 3 and then another parent does 3 to 11, where that's not there, that's a problem, right? And so, and I have many parents who, and part of that problem is their marriages suffer, and they're doing it for all the best intentions, and it's the only way they can afford it most of the time, right? But it's parental care. We are committed to parental care, but their relationships are literally non-existent. They literally pass in the night. I had some families who met on the highway and would swap the kid. One was leaving from work, one was coming, say hello. This is what happened during the day. See you later. And that's the only time they saw each other all week.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's probably also, and just in terms of their own well-being and mental health, because you're virtually a single parent during the week. But also what do kids see? Kids not only have these direct interaction with parents, they see family interactions. They absorb what's going on or how to interact or what you do when you come home or those sorts of things.
Right. It's so interesting. Like you said, they are sponges and they soak it up. So it is important to have those interactions with each other in front of them, obviously, if they're positive, and that goes into play. Dinner time is such an important,
Yes,
important model for, kids
yes.
to see and to have, right?
Yeah, I will say, there was a really interesting study that came out when I was in the midst of doing this study that was about the importance of family dinner and how family dinner was related to all these great outcomes for kids. And I had a lot of parents calling me because that came out like in the New York Times and all these articles and on the news saying, I'm not home at dinner. What do I do? Is this bad for my child? That kind of thing. And dinner time is a proxy for structure. It could be everybody has breakfast together. It could be we take a walk every hour. It could be it doesn't have to be the dinner time. It's that there's set interaction time that the family has together. That should have been the message, not just having dinner together. Does it? That's an easy solution for folks who maybe are all home at dinner time, but that's not the only solution. It's basically saying you've got built into your family system time where you hang out, you're together, and that kids can predict it and kids know it's coming. Even if it's things like we know every Friday night is movies and popcorn, becomes this family ritual, becomes a family routine that kids really value. And so I talk a lot with my families about, time is short. I get it. Create some simple rituals, simple things that you look forward to and they look forward to, and they know it's going to happen and they can rely on it and they can predict this is the time I'm going to get to be with mom or be with dad or be with everybody. And this is what it's going to look like. And even with infants who aren't yet maybe aware, obviously, of all of that, but the structure they need around sort of activities is also critically important. Yeah.
And we talk about all of these positive things that you can do. For the parents who do feel supported and, can relate to what you're saying in these positive instances, what exactly does happen to their kids? What is being translated for that next generation?
So the data, we followed our infants till they were entering the first grade. And so we got data from their teachers and from our own self-assessment. So it's great to have parents report on their kids, but parents are biased and parents report on their kids in ways that aren't necessarily going to give us the best data. So we actually assessed our kids with some clinical testing, and then we had teacher reports as well. And so we found the kids whose parents in the first year of their lives reported having, more autonomy at work and better supervisor support and more coworker relationships, better coworker relationships, had more engaged and less hostile parenting behaviors. And importantly, we had kids who had better social skills as reported by their teachers, more friendships as reported by their teachers, and better literacy and reading outcomes as based on our assessments. So that early year, and that's control, there's all these other things that are going on that clearly matter, but we were interested in just sort of the impact of that first year is playing out for kids' developmental outcomes, 6 years down the road. So for me, that kind of data, and given that kids in the United States, our data on how we're doing on almost every outcome has gone down every year compared to other countries, I think we have not focused on this first year very much, and what parents and kids really need during that time to set up some of these patterns. And so that's where my money's on. Like, we need to start making this more possible for parents and not so impossible.
Right. We need to support each other, and it's only going to help the future generations,
It's interesting when I've talked to CEOs and employers, part of the argument is always when I'm with the business world is what's the return on investment and, that kind of thing. And I'm like, yep, okay. Then there's lots of good data on retention and lead, that kind of thing. But I said, and this actually, I tend to have more bang with the older CEOs than I do with the younger ones, where I basically say, we as a society have to think about what the return on investment is. Like, not just your kid, but all our kids. Are all our kids doing better? Are our parents doing better? Are people reporting that life is worth it? And right now, as we know, there's a serious mental health crisis in this country. And we're all responsible for that. And I do think that the older folks that I talk to that are CEOs kind of are starting to feel this generativity, like, what's wrong? The younger ones, not so much, which was sort of surprising to me because they're usually the ones that are the parents at the moment. But I think it's the grandparents almost that are like, was it worth it? And what did we give back to our kids? And what are we giving back to our kids? And what's my responsibility, or how could I help that? Employers could do so much with I think a little bit, like a small change creates, I think, big outcome. So we'll see. I mean, there's some, companies now interested in starting to say, so what would we do? And how could we start doing this? And can we measure this? And can we monitor whether we're making a difference?
Right. Wow. That is so impactful when you think about it. Like I said in the beginning, you have to start somewhere. And if we just start implementing these minor changes, it'll catch on and we'll start to see the impact it's having on our kids in a good way.
I think folks just need to see the data from their own place. I think part of it is it's like, well, that's out there, but that's not my company, or that's not where I work. And I think when they see it in their own backyard, like I have a colleague who did work on supervisors, and they trained supervisors just to be more sensitive and family friendly and give supervisors some control to be able to support their employees. What often happens, these supervisors are just doing what the higher ups have told them, and they don't feel like they have control. And, a small change in sort of supervisor approach to working with their employees was related to better health outcomes, better sleep, better kid outcomes. I mean, it's not impossible, and it's not even that huge. It's just a commitment from the employers to sort of say, what could we, and granted, I think your question, the problem is there's not one do this, because if you're at a meat packing plant versus a phone in place, or it's going to be different. And that's where the extra little bit of being creative and work happens. Like, what does a different workplace need?
Right. Yeah. It's so funny you said that, because I feel as though even my generation, as new parents, we're coming into the scene and we're looking at all of this and we're hanging on every word, which makes sense when you said, that article about the dinner time with parents and kids. It makes sense why people were freaking out and calling you, because it's hard nowadays, especially with our phones too. We're staring at things and the answer right at our face, but it's almost like the application of that research and data. We have a hard time looking at the common sense, the overall scope of it. And we literally read things verbatim.
Literally, like, we have to have dinner tonight, every night, or our kids are going to, and that's, I mean, I'm sure that message for a lot of folks was actually a really good message, but thinking about who it could harm, or who feels like I'll never be that kind of parent because I can't do it that way, is where I think we need to be more responsible as conveyors of the information. If you can't do that, here's some other things that you could do that are going to be just as important, and why that actually works. It's not just having the meal together. It's what it evokes and what it creates in that family structure. So, and you're right, it's scary. I mean, every other day there's a headline. And I think, the headline from this was, many parents were like, great, now I'm going to feel guilty about yet another thing. And yeah. Which I totally understand. And it's like, wow, that was just the opposite of my intent. It's just the opposite, So I think we need to do a better job with those headlines. I think we need to do a better job and supporting parents and saying it's not all on you. I've not met a parent that doesn't truly love their child. And we've done over 370 interviews with multiple. Never have I met parents that can't manage to parent their kids very well. Yes. And part of that is because of what's surrounding them makes it virtually impossible for them to do the job. And that's where I think we as employers and we as teachers and we as a society, parents, this is a short amount of time that we need to be supporting them for the next generation. It just seems like a no-brainer to me.
Right. Yeah. Let's dedicate a few years to supporting the parents, shall we?
Yes, exactly. And acknowledging what a hard job it is. What a hard job it is. Incredibly rewarding and incredibly hard. And let's just start there and figure out when we can, give parents the biggest bang for their buck for what they're doing. And so I really want the message about this book to be, it's not just on parents to do this. It's on all of us. It's on workplaces. It's on, grandparents, other folks who are there as the support network for families.
And I'm so happy that we had you on Mommyhood Unscripted to set that headline straight, Maureen. It's so important. It really is to have these conversations and to take a step back and kind of look at the whole picture. Take a breath, look at the whole picture. No, you're not alone. And we got to do something to figure it out. And your research and what you've been dedicating your life to do is definitely an instrumental part of the puzzle here. So thank you for everything that you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you.
If you like what you heard, make sure to subscribe to Mommyhood Unscripted. Share it with your friends, too. It's available on iTunes, Google Play, Roku, and everywhere else you get your podcast. I'm Nicole. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, Mama, you're doing great.